my and I was on your side back in 2005 or 6 or something like that back in the day, and I loved it very much. And so I'm still here, and I am in California. I work in management consulting in organizational change management. Nice meeting you.
Thanks to you for being with us, John Truslow.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm John Truslow. I'm the Director of Ethics and Business Conduct for BAE Systems, which is, depending on how you count, the 3rd or 4th largest defense company in the world. My connection to the Ethics Bowl goes back many, many years. I used to be the coach of the Ethics Bowl team at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, and we even competed in this competition. So I'm thankful to still be a part.
Well, thank you, judges all. And my role is, among other things, to read to you, to the team, this paragraph, which sets up your presentation.
Hey, Ken, we lost your video. There we go.
Am I back?
You're back.
Okay, thank you. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 20 minutes. During that Q&A, both you and the judges will stay in character, in their fictional character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role play, some important things to keep in mind. The ethical aspects of your analysis are the most important. However, these should be described in a simple, practical, common sense fashion. Using technical, philosophical terminology or basing your argument on religious or theological grounds will be considered a serious weakness. During this presentation, every member of the team must have some sort of speaking role. And I'll do the timekeeping, and I will set the timer for 25 minutes. And at 25 minutes, I'll let everyone know that 25 minutes have passed, and that will mean that you have 5 more minutes if you need them as your cushion, if that's acceptable to everybody. Okay, so, and Ravi, our technician and superstar with Zoom, has a comment to make to the team.
Yeah, just for the team members, I'm going to spotlight you when you start talking during your presentation. So before you start, if you could just say your name so I know who to spotlight, because there's a bunch of people on here, that would be really appreciated. And then you could just start. That's it.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, there's no reason to delay unless there's some comment that someone else needs to make before we begin. Okay, then as far as I'm concerned, we should begin now, and I will press the 25-minute timer now.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. So, okay, so good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be talking to you all today. And so we're going to get into the 4th Industrial Revolution, particularly focusing on NFTs. And today we are the Eisenberg Innovation Consultants. So each one of us today, my name is Paul Maris, and each one of us will be represented by an icon today of an NFT. And so Fiona Herskovich, these are all my lovely teammates, and she will be represented by this icon. I will be represented by this kitty, Malcolm by the penguin, William, and finally Riley. So let's get started. So we're so happy to be able to talk to you, OpenC, the senior leadership. With you guys are the largest and the most, you are the first and the current largest market for NFTs. And that is why it's so important for us to talk to you today. And for our agenda, we're going to start with the background, the context, the ethical analysis, financial, and then legal into our recommendations. So let's get started. So context. So let's go back to the basics, right? Money is built on trust. That's why we can have a piece of paper be worth $20, $100, so on and so forth. And so we're well known. We're talking about this thing called the fourth industrial revolution. And it's going back to this term created by this economist, Klaus Schwab's book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2016, where he was talking about this fusion of advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, and the Internet of Things. And there's also this huge advancement in the way we're exchanging money. And here we are encountering a new and evolved way compared to fiat currency, where it's a centralized way, governments are the ones that distribute this money. However, now that we're moving into cryptocurrency, we're seeing that this type of way that we exchange money has a decentralized structure that allows it to exist outside of the control of governments and central authorities. And so a good example of what cryptocurrency is, you've probably heard about it a little bit, Bitcoin, or what we will be talking a little more about today being Ethereum. And so in general, what exactly is cryptocurrency? It's a digital currency based on blockchain technology. So what is a blockchain? So a blockchain, this technology was created by researchers in 1991. It was where they wanted to use the blockchain to timestamp digital documents and avoid backdating, so for security. And it has now become a distributed ledger that is open to anyone, kind of like a chat book that everyone has access to, and it has recorded transactions of every user, as well as where other users can come in and verify transactions as well. And there are two ways that you can validate cryptocurrency transactions. One way is proof of work, which uses a lot of energy, and the other way is proof of stake. And recently we have seen cryptocurrency shifting a little more from proof of work into proof of stake in order to conserve energy, especially with what we are seeing right now in our environment. So now that we've talked a little bit about cryptocurrency in general, let's talk about its advantages and disadvantages. So its advantages is that it's cheaper, it has faster money transactions. It's a decentralized system that does not necessarily collapse at a single point of failure. However, its disadvantage is that it has price volatility, high energy consumption for mining activities, kind of like what I just talked about with proof of work, and then it has been used in criminal activities. And so cryptocurrencies in general, they are what we call fungible tokens. If you exchange a Bitcoin, you're exchanging the same thing, something that is of the same value. But when we're talking about NFTs, this is what we call non-fungible tokens. So they're completely unique. They have unique identification codes and metadata that distinguish them from each other. And at a high level, most NFTs are part of the Ethereum blockchain. You can also just see it as it's just the cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrency that is used to exchange NFTs is Ethereum. And so NFTs can be anything digital. They can represent real world items like artwork, real estate, so on and so forth. And the current market is mainly centered around collectibles. And so that's where we see things like these being exchanged. And you may ask, well, Paulette, why are people paying so much money, as you can see right here, when you could just take a screenshot of this? Well, the thing is that what people are buying with all this money is owning the original, having that prestige. And so you could have, for example, you could buy a Monet piece at an art auction, and there can be millions of pictures of that Monet piece around the world, but there's going to be one person that has that original Monet piece in their living room or in their gallery, and they will know. And so let's talk a little bit about this. Okay, how are NFTs created and minted in general? So minting, meaning the process of turning your work into an NFT and placing it on an Ethereum blockchain. And so if I'm an artist and I put my work, I'm like, okay, let me put my work on this Ethereum blockchain. What an artist can do is that they can put it on there, and then now they can say, whenever this NFT is traded, I want to get a little bit of money back. So I'm being given credit for my work. So even if it's sold the first time, all the other times it is traded, you're going to get money, you're going to get credit, which is the really cool part. Artists can now monetize their artwork. And so every NFT marketplace, like OpenC, has a slightly different method of going about minting. And so that's why we're going to be particularly focusing on how minting and NFTs are created more through the OpenC process. And so whenever you go into doing any form of cryptocurrency exchange, you need to have something called a crypto wallet. And so this crypto wallet, you create it, and this is where your ID will be linked to your crypto wallet. That's where you can store tokens and NFTs. That is also where you will be able to bring in your social network information. And with this crypto wallet, when you do minting or you create an NFT, you go in it, you connect it to the marketplace that you want to work with. When creating your NFT, you upload your digital file, you give it a name, you add specific details or benefits. So for example, I say, okay, if someone buys my NFT, someone can also get these concert tickets, or someone can get this spot in a specific prestige club. So with that, you can also add how much you want to be paid in royalties whenever your NFT gets sold or traded. And as for the next steps, you make sure your wallet is funded, make sure you have the cryptocurrency you need in order to exchange. You list your NFT for sale. And then finally, you continue with managing your NFT business. And so just to give a little bit, it's a similar process when you exchange. You have your crypto wallet, you choose your NFT marketplace, you look for and you find what NFT you want to trade or buy, and then you make your bidding. So what are the benefits of NFTs? So in general, blockchain technology is generally pretty secure. Of course, just like anything, it's not a perfect system. And for example, if an NFT, wherever, let's say you buy an NFT, the platform that has your NFT, if it goes out of business, there is a possibility of you losing access to your NFT. So that's a small risk. However, apart from that, NFTs create this very big market efficiency by removing intermediaries. And so now artists can connect directly with their audiences. You can also receive immediate revenue and ensuring recognition for your original work. It's excellent for identity management. NFTs can also democratize investing by fractionalizing physical assets. There's a possibility for the creation of new markets and forms of investment. And a big thing is that it can be the cornerstone of the metaverse. We talked a little bit about how NFTs are now being this new way of how we're shifting with the way we interact with technology, this new fourth industrial revolution. And so now this can be a big cornerstone of how we start moving into the metaverse. So let's dive into OpenC. I talked a little bit about you guys. You are a four-year-old company. You've gained fame and a 13 billion valuation by staking a claim in the world's biggest marketplace, NFTs. And so you're a major leader in this marketplace, as you can see. And of course, in terms of transaction volume, you hold 90% of the market share, which is insane. So the thing is that NFTs are a bit of a double-edged sword. With this huge market growth, you have the bigger opportunities for fakes and for scammers to try and get users money and access to new flamed assets. And so what makes NFTs so attractive is that aspect that they are decentralized, right? They are independent. But if something goes wrong, OpenC, the company, is expected to enforce the rules and hold people accountable if they do something wrong or if they steal an NFT, however it may be. And so you're stuck in a hard place because you have you have NFTs being decentralized, but you're expected to be a centralized force. So it's about finding this balance. And of course, an NFT of any image or video can be made even if that individual does not own the copyright of the image, video, or audio. And OpenC and many other NFT buyers and sellers consider an NFT in which that was created to be to not own the copyright, to be stolen and counterfeit. And you guys have already been doing a lot by putting it on your website to where artists can go in and fill out takedown orders that if their art is being ripped off. However, we're starting to see more and more concerns about artists reporting major issues regarding your copyrights. And you are answering this. However, there have been continuous complaints that you are not reacting fast enough. And on top of that, that you are prioritizing other artists that are more popular rather than ones that to create it equal with compared to other artists who are not as popular. Another aspect is that you have this alleged insider trading problem that created a scandal where an employee, knowing insider information about the company, they started making trades that would benefit them based on the information they knew when they shouldn't have. And you did address this at one point, which is great. However, with now you have this problem of bots affecting NFT auctions, where you're starting to get a lot of bots who are raising the value of an NFT, they're bidding, and then right as the NFT is going to be sold to the bot, they cancel. So you're getting a lot of cancellations. And on top of that, you're also getting NFTs that are being sold for less because of their interaction within the marketplace. That's causing a lot of frustration with your customers. So it's important to keep in mind that these problems are only going to get worse as the marketplace grows. And if you are to continue being leaders in this space, it's important to remember that markets like OpenSea are to be the bridge through which society can prepare its laws and ethics when encountering fast developing technology. Again, we have this fourth revolution, industrial revolution. We're shifting away from we're shifting into a new way in which we can interact digitally. And so I'll leave it off to Malcolm to continue.
Thank you. So moving on to some of the ethical considerations of OpenSea with respect to issues of NFTs. First off, we have this sort of, next slide, please. We have this sort of central ethical question that we're grappling with, which is, what are the values of a decentralized model versus the sort of the legal values and legal protections built up since the founding of our nation of sort of the centralized model? And sort of OpenSea is really at the between the tension of these two. And so when we think of it from a duty-based sort of analysis perspective, you as OpenSea have a duty to make an ethical decision, not just from the perspective of your creators and users, but also you have a duty to the communities, not just, the creatives community. You want to attract people to use your website, but you also have a duty to the DeFi community and to your investors, and sort of a duty to shaping this technology now for the future use of the metaverse and sort of society. You want to benefit and embed sort of legal and ethical values within this technology while it's in its infancy stage, before it could sort of start dictating the terms of interaction online, as well as respecting the duty of a legal system in a virtual space. And so what happens when you neglect legal values and you neglect sort of the legal protections? Take LooksRare. They're the second biggest NFT marketplace right after you as OpenSea. They took a more sort of bullish stance on decentralized values, and with no regard to fraudulent activity, they actually encouraged fraudulent activity. The company will be hit with a lot of lawsuits, and I think they will be failing as a business. So that's just an example of what it's like when you do not embed these ethical values into the technology now. Moving on, I think looking at it from a cost benefit analysis, we see real value with NFTs, right? Artists can be connecting to their audiences with no middleman. There's no gatekeeping. There's a sense of democratization and equal participation in the share of value. However, the cost to society is also immensely large. There's litigation costs, there's IP and copyright issues if you don't address this. Buyer confidence, users will migrate from your marketplace to another one, and there's going to be a lot of loss of full value. So it's really, really imperative that we want to capture the benefits of this technology without feeling the cost of an unregulated NFT environment, because law is the minimum ethical requirement, and you can't violate law and be ethical. So if you want to get it right, you can't undermine the legal and law protection. Moving on, some other important ethical considerations and concerns. We see this space will be evolving, right? There's a lot of environmental impact. There's new ESG reporting requirements around energy intensive business activity, certainly around disclosures. We just want you to be aware of that. And there's also the potential disparity of access issue. We want to create a diverse and inclusive environment around this technology, but we have to be careful how we handle that. This is just some considerations in the future, but for today's scope, we just want to focus on IP and copyright issues. And lastly, the ethics today are going to be the feature of tomorrow. So acting now while this technology is nascent and we have an opportunity to, again, shape the future by coding and embedding the legal values and legal protections we've developed into this technology now will power the metaverse to be a better experience and conflicts resolved. And it will also work financially, which we'll get into in a bit.
So hi, I'm Will, and I'm going to start off the financial analysis. So first, I want to talk a little bit about your company and the NFT market. Your company is currently the industry leader with 90% of the market share, and you managed to do this by being the first company in this industry. In 2021, the NFT market saw $21 billion in transactions, more than 700,000 buyers in August alone. Your company obviously wants to stay the industry leaders, and there are some steps that need to be taken to ensure this. Next slide. Now, your current costs are currently restricted to employee compensation, server maintenance, energy, etc. And all these costs add up to around $15 to $20 million. And with $50 million from commission alone, you're in good shape to expand as a company in the future. Next slide. However, there are costs to negligence. Failure to prevent theft and copyright infringement will result in a loss of customer trust and satisfaction. There's also monetary losses, such as lawsuits, which you have been involved with in the past, as well as copyright infringement penalties, which could be up to $30,000 per case. This could easily lead to a loss of market share. So what you want to do is bridge the gap between the law and the metaverse to prevent future litigation, which in turn could hinder expansion. Thank you.
So the main point to consider is that if you choose to do nothing about these regulatory problems, it will result in the eventual failure of your company, as well as failure of the market overall, given your large share of the market. So the two most important factors moving forward without regulations would be, well, a lack of consumer trust, as well as a drop in customer satisfaction. Because if your consumers can't trust the safety of your market, then the market itself will eventually dissolve and your consumers will take their money elsewhere. If you can't make your customers happy, then they will leave for a safer, more customer-friendly marketplace as opposed to OpenSea. And the way we see it, costs associated with addressing these regulations will lead to future benefits, including maintaining your large share of the market. Next slide. So what are these costs of implementing our recommendations? It's important to remember that the costs we present to you are only projections, and we need to work more with you to work out the details of these projections. So the costs we project OpenSea, assuming when following our implementation plan, range from loss of the market share to coding costs, disclosure documents, anti-bot programs, which are all displayed by the costs associated to the right. We'll have to work with you again to get more definitive terms around these costs and mitigate them effectively in the future. So the most important thing to remember is that what you stand to gain if you implement these costs sooner, as the placement of your company in the industry puts you at an opportunistic position to influence the industry while staying ahead of the regulatory curve. So an effective way to do this is to use on and off ramps to mitigate these problems. By its very nature as a marketplace, OpenSea serves as a special role in facilitating connection of the metaverse as well as the real world. Because of this role, it puts you at an opportunistic position to mitigate these liabilities through disclosures about NFT purchases, as well as overall regulatory oversight for your users, which leads into my next point about making your users aware of the volatility and value of the NFT market. NFTs have the value and potential of the art industry, which, as you may know, is a pretty crazy market when it comes to value and volatility sometimes. So going forward, it'll be essential to make consumers aware that they are assuming some risk with their transactions and that the value will fluctuate over time. Like the art industry, the value is highly volatile, usually associated to what we as users are interested in at the moment. We have to present this industry as a long-term investment to our users with potential to be a high-value market, while also assuming the considerations with volatility of the products. And these are things to consider moving forward while trying to stay ahead of the regulatory curve, which Fiona will go into more detail in the following slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Riley. Next slide. Perfect. So over the course of the presentation, my teammates have determined that OpenSea can serve as this bridge between the metaverse and the real world. And the way that OpenSea can do this is by incorporating elements of the centralized legal system into your decentralized market operations. Next slide. And so what are these different legal elements that should be incorporated? A lot of them have to do with intellectual property law, specifically within the realm of copyright law. One of the biggest challenges with NFTs is that we're seeing is making sure that the creators of NFTs own the copyright to the work that they are uploading on the blockchain. The second challenge is ensuring that creators of NFTs understand specifically what rights are they provided with once the NFT is created and then sold, which we'll discuss further into our recommendations. Next slide. So how are NFTs and copyright law related? So the decentralized nature of the NFTs has brought into question the reach of intellectual property as it relates to the creation and purchase of these digital assets, which relates to kind of that first challenge of NFTs that we were talking about. So the ownership of NFTs are recorded on the blockchain, which, as Paulette alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, is a pretty secure and inimitable way of recording these transactions. However, the blockchain does not tell the buyer whether an NFT is merely a copy of somebody else's work, which calls into question Section 504 of the Copyright Act, which states that the sale of an infringing work by either a completely innocent actor or a willful one could lead to a variety of intellectual property infringement liabilities. Next slide. So here's an example case to kind of put this into perspective. We have CryptoPunks versus CryptoFunks. CryptoPunks were one of the first NFTs to hit the marketplace, and soon after, CryptoFunks were created as kind of a parody to poke fun. So in this hypothetical situation, let's say you purchased 10 CryptoFunks for 0.1 Ethereum each. You sold all 10 for 1 Ethereum each, and then Larva Labs, the creator of CryptoPunks, convinced a court that CryptoFunks infringed on CryptoPunks. Lots of different CryptoPunks happening here. But what are you liable for, and who else is liable? In terms of your liabilities, you could be amounting to up to $1.5 million, and every other person that you've sold a CryptoFunk to is also liable. And so this indicates kind of a question here of there's actually intellectual property infringement within the metaverse space itself, as well as, next slide, within the actual real world and metaverse space itself as well. So the question in the case of the Meta Birkin bag is a perfect example to highlight this, because Hermes International ended up suing the Los Angeles designer Mason Rothschild with a trademark lawsuit after Rothschild listed the Meta Birkin bag as an NFT. Basically, Rothschild uploaded a screenshot of the Hermes iconic Birkin bag as an NFT, which Hermes saw was not transformative enough, was not different enough from the real Birkin bag to institute fair use. And so this calls into question that there needs to be some kind of institution of the centralized legal landscape here in order to control the copyright infringement as the metaverse consistently grows larger and intellectual property infringement continues. Next slide. And your company has tried to do this. January 26, 2022, OpenSea tried to curtail the amount of fake NFTs on the site, but this was inevitably rolled back because of backlash that users were really interested in that free and unlimited minting that OpenSea is often associated with. And so something to remember here from this misstep is that OpenSea can't just institute all of these centralized regulations at once. They need to balance them with the rights and with the other interests of their consumers in the decentralized space that got them interested in the metaverse in the first place. Next slide. So now that we understand kind of the legal uncertainty of NFTs, let's talk about the financial regulatory uncertainties. So at present, there is no governing agency that established regulations on the sale and purchase of NFTs. However, there are 3 organizations that have laid claim to the regulations. That's the CFTC, SEC, and FinCEN. Next slide. So the CFTC has stated that the NFT could be considered a commodity because it shares enough similarities with cryptocurrencies, which are also considered a commodity. The SEC is interested in regulating NFTs because some NFTs, when employed with the Howey test, have the existence of an investment contract, and therefore the SEC would like regulatory control over the space, as it does with typical investments such as stocks that also have investment contracts. And lastly, FinCEN. FinCEN regulates money service businesses models that include digital currencies. So NFTs are regarded as exchange and money transmission activities, and so therefore FinCEN might consider them to be subject to bank secrecy acts such as KYC. Next slide. So inevitably, there are going to be NFTs that pass the Howey test, and there are also going to be NFTs that are going to lead to theft and potential money laundering, as we've seen with the recent Poly network hack that led to $600 million worth of NFTs to be stolen. What's important to recognize here is that there is a need for differentiated regulation in order to encompass the wide, vast diversity that exists within the NFT market space. Next slide. Perfect. So now that we understand kind of the uncertainty and the grayness of this space, we're seeing. Perfect. We'll take that 5-minute buffer. Thank you.
Sure.
So we've seen that there have been international bans on cryptocurrency, but we want OpenSea to understand that the uncertainty of this space should not push them away from this cutting edge technology, but rather your company should use this uncertainty as a catalyst to create a safer metaverse. And we've been seeing that other international spaces, such as Luxembourg, have categorized NFTs with the use of a communal framework. And so what we really want to push here is that OpenSea create these communal frameworks by working with legal and financial professionals in the real world and the users of the metaverse to create a set of communal regulations that both protect the consumer as they do in the real world, but as also afford them the freedoms of the decentralized finance network. Next slide. And it would be an oversight not to also recognize that there are specific environmental regulations that are also on the horizon that should be taken into account, such as the ongoing work around migrating Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake. And there are a variety of international environmental regulations that are pushing the blockchain to become a little bit more sustainable. Next slide. We are now going to move to our set of recommendations. So we've broken down our recommendations into 3 tiers. We have the short term, the middle term, and the long term. If there's anything that you get from this presentation, it is this specific slide. These are the recommendations that you can implement immediately as OpenSea. And that includes establishing best practices, educational initiatives, implementing nudge questions, and ensuring understanding of potential regulation value volatility. Next slide. So for that first one, by engaging in an educational initiative, you're going to be ensuring that creators and buyers of NFTs are aware of copyright issues and best practices, therefore fulfilling your duty to the consumer. In addition, implementing nudge questions into the self-authorization process by ensuring that when anyone is buying or selling or purchasing an NFT, there are pop-up questions that ensure that they understand all of the rights that they are being afforded in that process. And lastly, ensuring understanding of potential regulation value volatility by ensuring that you're incorporating questions into NFT creation purchase processes that make individuals aware of the risks of this investment. Next slide. So examples of these nudge questions, which we also include in the appendix as well, such as for the creator, are you the creator of the underlying work? For the buyer, are you aware of the potential liabilities that you could ensue? And then for both the creators and the buyers, are you aware of the value volatility and potential regulations? Next slide. These are the middle term recommendations. These all kind of point to the improvement of OpenSea in terms of its technological aspects. And that includes algorithm advancement, anti-bot technology, and responsiveness to copyright violations. Next slide. So algorithm advancement and anti-bot technology are kind of one big step that OpenSea can take towards improving their plagiarism and improving the copycat NFTs that exist onto the site. And so by implementing and innovating anti-bot technologies and developing an algorithm for reviewing NFTs for copyright violations and to prevent bot creation of NFTs, they'll make OpenSea a little bit more regulated in terms of copyright infringement. And then lastly, in terms of responsiveness to copyright violations, making sure to improve your response to combating copyright violations and takedown orders, which we kind of have seen with the Meta Birkin bag, and ensuring that people that are being infringed upon with their intellectual property, those counterfeit NFTs are being taken down almost immediately. And that brings us to our long-term strategy with OpenSea. And so this long-term strategy will help to fulfill OpenSea's duty to the consumer, to its employees, and to the future of the metaverse space. OpenSea can be leaders in the regulatory sphere in 3 ways. The first is by helping to establish and enforce intellectual property protections by working with legal professionals in the physical world and users of OpenSea to both protect users from copyright infringement and also afford them the decentralized freedoms of the metaverse. The second is by helping to create a communal financial regulation with the help of professionals in the real world and the insights of users of the metaverse to create a set of regulations that fits the diverse array of NFTs in the marketplace and ensures that creators and buyers understand and are protected from the risks of this digital investment. The regulations are coming. The communal nature of these regulations, though, they might not occur without OpenSea's advocacy and collaboration. And the third way that OpenSea can be seen as leaders in the regulatory space is by aligning the goals of the creators of the Ethereum blockchain with international and domestic climate agendas to move towards a more sustainable blockchain. Next slide. We believe that if OpenSea begins to implement these regulatory frameworks and assumes their rightful leadership in this space, that OpenSea can indeed be the bridge between the digital world of the metaverse and the physical world.
We're open now to questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You came in with 37 seconds to spare. And thank you for your presentation. I would like now to invite the senior management, senior leaders of OpenSea to respond to your presentation. Let me invite Mr. Golden first.
Thank you. A very interesting presentation. Left me a little short of breath at times, but you make some very interesting points in the presentation. But I'd like to know from your perspective right now, as 90% of the market share, a lot of what you suggest implementing will slow down people as they try and use the website. People who use the website and other digital places are not known for patience. And so can you, or do you have any idea about what, especially in the beginning, loss of market share would occur as we implement all these things? And the other related to that is, do you have any plans or suggestions about how we market this to the users so they see this as a very positive experience and are willing to slow down and spend more time making their choices or being educated, which a lot of this will do to them?
Yeah, I can take the first part of that question, then Paulette, I'm going to pass it to you for the next part. So in terms of your question about what would be the loss of market share that could occur as we implement, such as these nudge questions, I think what's important to recognize here is that by implementing these nudge questions in the first place, we are ensuring that consumer art is being taken seriously and that there's a less intellectual property infringement. So although these nudge questions are going to slow individuals down from purchasing and from uploading NFTs, it's also important to recognize that if we don't do this, there is the potential for OpenSea and our network to be overrun by counterfeit NFTs and overrun by bots. And so, yes, I think that there could potentially be a loss of market share initially, and such as on all these upfront expenses that Riley and Will also alluded to in the financial portion. But there is a considerable amount of payoff in the end here, in that we are protecting our consumer and ensuring that at the end of the day, their art is the only art that is there, and that there are no other copycats, no other intellectual property infringements in the space. And so we are willing to recommend that there is a slight loss of market share in exchange for a safer and more regulated sphere that can protect our users, but also ensure that they have the freedoms of the decentralized networks to have that free and unlimited minting. I'm going to pass it to Paulette.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. So that question regarding marketing is a phenomenal question. A big thing that just immediately came to mind for me was, you're right, people within the space can be a little bit impatient because technology has kind of pushed us to be that way. However, a way that we can market this is by saying, you know what, we're putting this into place because of the fact that we are going to be the leaders to shift us into the metaverse. A lot of those people that are in that space, yes, may be a little bit impatient and may not like how this is going to change the way they have been interacting with NFTs at the moment, but they're going to be looking at the future and saying, whoa, this is what we're going to be seeing now. This is going to be, we're going to start the metaverse. This is the cornerstone. And so I think that's where it'll create such a unique look at it, because OpenSea would actually be the first one to really push for it and say, we're marketing this because we're actually going to start putting this into place for regulatory, whatever it may be, laws or ethics that we implement with it, because of the fact that we're going to start shifting into a technology that is advancing so much faster than our regulatory ideas and laws can keep up with it. And so we're first taking that first step. And I think that's going to attract so many people who are already in that space saying, whoa, these people are already thinking way ahead of a curve. And that is a great way to go ahead and go for it. To add on to what Fiona was talking about for the market share, there's always a risk whenever you go for something, and we don't really know how this could actually impact it. Maybe it actually adds a little bit to where more people shift over and we get a little more market share. Or maybe it is that we sacrifice a little just for us to be leaders going forward and to in the future receive more benefit out of it. So you never really know, but it's just like any risk, it can be a really high pay for it. And maybe you'll see more royalties in the future with more artists recognizing that, you know what, they have our backs. Like, this organization now has our backs for us to go forward, and their royalties. And now with more artists going into it, you get more royalties, you get more artists who are saying, you know what, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this, and so on and so forth. And maybe now you can even start getting companies to go more into it, because we have seen a lot of companies go into it, and McDonald's has been working with part of the metaverse. Nike has been working with part of the metaverse. They've been really starting to grab little aspects of that. And that is what OpenSea could open itself up to. Thank you for the question.
I yield back.
Okay, let's move on to Shivani Nag.
Thank you, Ken. First off, great presentation. Thank you for taking the time to go through all the details. It seems to me that a lot of your feedback around what we can improve is focused on regulatory aspects of how we do business. Can you please restate more concisely and precisely exactly the ethical issue and responsibility that you are suggesting that we should consider, and also your recommendations from an ethical standpoint?
Yeah, I could take this one. Thank you. So we have a duty, like ethically, to address technology and build in these legal and sort of frameworks and things into the technology. Code can have these things built into it, but we have to make that choice. And it makes sense from an ethical standpoint that like law is the minimum requirement of ethics, and building that as a first step into the technology and into our protocols will enable better decision making and more protection, and it makes sense from an ethical perspective. That's the first part of it, I'd say.
Is there anything else that the team would like to add to that response?
Yeah, I was waiting for other teammates, but definitely I can hop in here. I think that's a really good question. And in terms of I know we definitely went very deep into the nitty gritty of the legal section. I think you can tell that our advisor is a lawyer in and of herself. But I think the biggest ethical consideration that we have to consider here is that, as Malcolm alluded to, the ethics of today are the laws of tomorrow. And so some of the legal regulatory frameworks that we've suggested here find their origins in the ethics of protecting the consumer and protecting the space of technology in and of itself. And so I think something that was really interesting that we pointed to in the ethical section that I'd like to kind of talk about more here is this idea of protection of the future. If we don't implement these legal and regulatory and financial regulations, we're preventing the innovation of a massive digital space that at the moment has made the creation of art and the selling of art 10 times more accessible. It has completely eliminated that third-party agent. And so there's an ethical duty here that OpenSea has to its consumers, to its mission as a company, to make the metaverse a more accessible place and a safer place. And so the way that they can do that is by instituting some of these centralized aspects of the regulatory frameworks, including law and finances, and coupling that with the users of the metaverse and their interests. I think what was really interesting was they tried to do this and their users were really upset by their limiting of NFTs that we alluded to earlier in the presentation. And so OpenSea has made those steps, but it needs to also bring in its consumers with them because they have a duty to the consumer. The company would not exist without the millions of individuals that have been able to upload the art onto the website. And so these legal and financial regulatory frameworks that we've suggested and recommended today find their origins in the ethics of business and find the ethics in the ethics of consumer business and making sure that we're protecting our customer and protecting the space of the metaverse in and of itself. I hope that answered your question, Shivani.
It does. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
And Mr. Truslow.
Yeah, so I'm going to poke at the same area just because I guess, from my vantage point on, as running this company, I'm saying, sure, I agree with you. I have certain moral obligations and certain responsibilities to different people. And I'm trying to figure out which one is more important. In other words, if I have to give one or the other, I may not be able to satisfy my obligations to everybody. I have to make some choices. And I guess I'd like you to help me make some choices. So I'll give you three. If the company has to favor one set of responsibilities over the other, would you say that we should favor creating the marketplace, like creating this thing where people come and can trade freely regardless of what they want to trade? So that's one thing. Do we have a responsibility to society? And I think it's the way you guys phrased it. Do we have a responsibility first to society just to create the marketplace? Second, do we have a primary responsibility to manage or regulate the content of that marketplace? Or third, do we have an obligation, if you will, to the law or to whatever, to regulate the purpose of the transaction? So here we'll be talking about like money laundering and the reasons why people trade, the sort of the ill intent, right? So all of that you've talked about, I may have to weigh as the leader of the company, which is the one that I should be looking more towards, the overall marketplace, the transactions themselves, or the reasons for those transactions?
So that's a good question. You are going to make trade-offs, difficult trade-offs. That's the whole sort of balance that you as a company need to take in this space. I think respect to why people make transactions, I think any sort of system of monetary transfer of value will experience people money laundering. I mean, cash is money laundered. It's a system that will experience that. And I think identifying at least basic instances of fraud and IP should be a trade-off that you're targeting first, because if you do not address these issues, you might, be neglecting some other duties of market share, but you're going to be hit with litigation costs that are going to supersede whatever benefits you're allowing of basically making it okay to trade. I mean, you look at something like LooksRare, right? They allow fraud. They openly applaud it. They're not really addressing it, and they're going to feel a lot of pain from market costs. So if that answers part of your question, I think a colleague can double back on that.
Yeah, that was a really good question, John, especially the aspect of which one you should prioritize, because that's what companies have to do every single day. And I think, and once I finish this, I'm sure a teammate will also piggyback off of me. But the thing is that I think first, most of the time, a company first focus is, it depends on what they prioritize, right, as a company. Let's say OpenSea is the main priority is their customers, being their artists. So it would be more of like, okay, let's focus on our ethical responsibility as well as almost legal responsibility towards our customers first. And it's almost kind of like, I'm imagining almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Not exactly like that, of course, but kind of like seeing it as a tiered. If you fulfill one thing, okay, great, you can move on to the next one. So maybe you could start look at it as this way, because you're right, you can't make everybody happy. It's incredibly difficult. Companies struggle with that every single day, no matter in what space they are in. And so maybe a good way to take it, kind of like the baby steps. How do you eat an elephant? Bite, bite, bite. And so you have this, let's say, the tier, right? Okay, so first, let's make sure we get the needs of our customers. That is set. Next, we make sure that we create a space within the marketplace and we develop the marketplace the way we think it should ethically and legally be. And then finally, we move on to, okay, this is forward thinking, this is long term. Let's take it a step further. Let's be further leaders that can turn the metaverse and make it and add this ethicality to it. So our technology doesn't become just this cold thing that just is meant to be for chaos. So I would recommend that kind of like looking at a tiered approach. No matter what stage you are in and no matter how much you have on your plate, you won't be able to make anybody happy. But as long as you continue to say, you know what, I've been able to satisfy this, and you move on, I've been able to satisfy this and then move on. Every once in a while, you'll be able to go back and fix those nook and crannies, because no matter what, you will always learn from your past, and you will also learn as you go forward. And maybe you find the answers to problems you had in the past by moving forward. So my example would be like, let's say you are now moving on and you're working on how to make the marketplace better, right? And you say, you know what, I just realized that a good solution to this problem, which we encountered when we were working with our customers, could be this. Because you moved on to that next phase, you found a solution to make something better or to innovate something from your last tier, if that made sense. So I'll let somebody take it away if they wish.
If there's time, I would love to kind of piggyback off of this, but John, I think that your question actually, that was kind of the perfect way for us to apply our recommendation set that we had within our presentation. Starting with your first kind of responsibility there of creating the marketplace and our duty to society. The marketplace has been created. The NFT marketplace is an established entity. However, it is just a matter of strengthening it with an educational initiative and letting individuals know about the potential legal implications that selling and creating and purchasing NFTs have. And so I would say that at the moment, in terms of favoring one set of responsibilities, I would encourage instead OpenSea to look a little bit more at that middle term in terms of, do we have a responsibility to manage the content? Because if the marketplace is already created, we have like the nooks and crannies and the bolts and nuts of the marketplace already instituted. Right now, we have to think about how are we preventing these counterfeit NFTs from entering the marketplace? How do we prevent anti-bot technology? And I think in doing so, we're also kind of fulfilling that third responsibility that you presented here of, do we have an obligation to the law to regulate the purpose of the transaction? And I know that that was more meant in terms of money laundering, but if we are kind of already beginning to implement these central legal recommendations from the real world into the metaverse space, we're beginning to kind of form almost a pathway for more law to be created in terms of regulating the purpose of the transaction. So to answer your question in a way, we believe kind of that the company would have to favor the responsibility of managing the content because it's already created a marketplace. And in the future, by managing the content of OpenSea itself, there's the potential for the obligation of law to be fulfilled in the long term. I hope that made sense.
Thank you.
And as a senior leader of OpenSea, I have a couple of questions myself. I'm a little bit confused about whether you have done any research about if I understood you correctly, the backlash that took place in January when we instituted some changes. Could you repeat what you said about that, and because it put me on my guard against these other changes that you're recommending. My fellow senior leaders are a little worried about loss of market share and the consequences to our company. If January is any indication, this could be a much larger concern than meets the eye.
I 100% understand. Paula, do you think that you could go back to that slide? I think having kind of, as I've seen kind of just like working with the legal section specifically with this case, it's really helpful to kind of have just like a narrative and to understand it as a story. Perfect. I think it's a little bit back. Sorry. In the legal section. Oh, yeah, all good. You're fine.
Which slide do you want?
Keep going into the legal section. That one. Back.
Okay.
Back. One more.
Oh, one more.
Yep.
Okay.
All good.
Go ahead.
One more.
One question. Okay.
There you go. Perfect. So this slide is called attempts at self-regulation. So to kind of give a little bit more context. So January 26th, OpenSea tried to curtail the amount of fake NFTs on the site because there was an overrun of counterfeit NFTs created either by bots or by individuals that were trying to copy and paste NFTs that had already been created and then uploading them onto the blockchain. So one of the ways that OpenSea's tried to limit the amount of fake NFTs on the site was by announcing that their free and unlimited minting was going to come to an end. And instead, that each user was going to be limited to up to 5 collections, each one of them containing no more than 50 NFTs. Naturally, users were originally drawn to the space of OpenSea because of that free and unlimited minting aspect of it. And so backlash ensued. And the decision ended up being reversed within 24 hours because users of OpenSea were so upset about this onslaught of regulations that limited their freedoms within a pretty decentralized network. It was too sudden. And so something that is really important to gather here is that this shouldn't be an instance of not wanting to implement any regulations at all and becoming a company like LooksRare that Malcolm was talking about. But more, this should be an example of, yes, there are fake NFTs on the site. Yes, there are intellectual property infringements that are going to occur. So in order for OpenSea to navigate both protecting its consumers and protecting the artist itself and ensuring that there's not a million NFTs that look exactly like the crypto kitty, and also ensuring that users of the NFT space are having access to that free and unlimited minting, there needs to be this kind of communal agreement and communal collaboration between legal and financial professionals in the real world, as well as the users of the metaverse, in order to form a set of recommendations and to form a set of regulations that are actually going to help to mitigate the intellectual infringement property lawsuits within this space. Both groups kind of have to see one another's insights and to form a set of communal regulations that both protect the consumer, but also afford them the freedoms of the decentralized metaverse that brought them to OpenSea in the first place. So the idea to really take away from the situation is that you tried, and just because you failed this once to go through with that regulation doesn't mean that there's a massive roadblock against any future regulations. In fact, this should serve as a catalyst to find other methods of regulating the sphere by interacting with your current users, as well as collaborating with the legal and financial professionals of the real world to truly bridge the metaverse and the real world together.
Well,
Yes,
okay, but you made me nervous.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, I'm coming out of my role now. It's time for us as judges to drop our roles, and thank you very much for your presentation and your resilience in answering questions. And let's open it up now for comments from the judges about your presentation and any suggestions that they might have as you go forward in the competition to the 10-minute and the 90-second competitions tomorrow. So maybe we could all get ourselves on the screen, Robbie. Great. Okay. So now we're not senior leaders in OpenSea. We're just ourselves, and we want to offer constructive criticism about the presentation itself. Leon, can I return to you?
Yes, thank you. A wonderful presentation. You took an enormous amount of information in a very short period of time, which is a challenge when you get to shorter presentations. But I think you really presented a lot, and you presented it well. I would make the following comments to make it better in a way. You got to the issue of the problems of distrust, counterfeiting, and bots into the presentation. But that's the driving force for OpenSea to change. And my recommendation would be to start there. The reason you're here is because this world is changing, and what can OpenSea do, and why should it do it? So here's the problem. We have a 90% market share. I think a presumption has to be when presenting it to the board in some sense that we ought to understand a little bit about NFTs if we're running a company that markets in them. But the other thing you also implied from or I inferred as you presented, is this is about trust. Companies survive because their clients trust them. What's happening is there's a potential for loss of trust because of bots in this. And here's our recommendation to help OpenSea regain the trust of the community it serves, which is vital to its survival. And that's the context in which I would place it. The other thing, just as a presentation technique, I wouldn't say if that makes sense. I'd say, does that, if that, does that answer your question, or do you have more? The other, just alluding a little bit to John's point, while there are these choices, one of the things you're recommending is that the company needs to address the sort of paradoxical and. Everything is, it's this or this or this. The challenge is, how do we do it all? How do we do this and this and this to really become a superior company that addresses the challenges? And they're enormous challenges. But the other that you alluded at the end, which maybe find its way in somewhere earlier, is the only way you can do this is to market, but the only way you can market it is, especially in the metaverse, is you have to engage everybody in the question of the changes that are coming. And that's what OpenSea sort of learned, because it didn't, which is surprising. But so those are the comments I would have, but it really was a good presentation. I learned a lot, actually. So thank you.
Judge Nog?
Did you say me, Ken?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I thank you, Leon, actually, for your insight, because as you were giving that feedback, I was in my head thinking, yeah, that's actually what I was trying to say as well. So big picture, I think, again, you did a tremendous job compiling a lot of very detailed and complex information in a finite period of time. I know that this is the shorter presentation, and so I noticed that there was a lot of fast talking, and I was trying really hard to follow along, but I would either taper down the slides, I know that's really hard to do, or refine your talking points so that you're getting, as Leon had pointed out, like he gave you a sequence of talking points that would kind of reframe your main points and your key messaging, so that right out the gate, you're capturing the attention of senior leaders. Senior leaders are often known to have an attention span of a fly. So you've got about 15 seconds to really either get their positive attention, or they're going to span out and start looking at their phone. So just, a perspective of who your audience is in that way. When it came to priorities, I think you did a good job of saying, it's always hard as a business leader to say, if you have like 5 priorities, like you've got to weigh them all out and all of that. I think as consultants, I would have expected a stronger recommendation to say, here are your 5 priorities, and here's why we think the ethical priority should be number 1. Because although these positives and all these other priorities are important, and those have been driving your values and your business priorities, here's why the ethical aspect of it is number 1, not the legal, not the regulatory. Specifically, how do you build trust with your customer base to maintain market share? I would have liked to hear a little bit more about competitors. And so from an ethical standpoint, if you want OpenSea to be an ethical role model in the industry, what does that look like in comparison to what our competitors are doing as they kind of run a similar space? So it would have been nice to see a quick mention of that. Yeah, so those are my points. I think, again, it's not easy compiling all this information into a small space, but definitely take some time to reshuffle the way that you start the presentation and the way that you sequence your key messaging and recommendations right after that to capture attention. So thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Treslow.
So I think everything that I have to say has already been said, so I won't linger on it for very long. I'll just simply say I did feel like the presentation went very, very, very quickly. And so it was at times I had my eyes closed just trying to listen to every single word to try to make sure I was capturing everything. And that's, for old people running a company, that's too hard, right? So if there was a way to maybe simplify that, that would be helpful. You've already heard this before. I think, businesses are always making trade-offs. In a way, the structure of the ethics competition here today is a little, it encourages students to do what you guys did, which is to first do legal, then do finance, then, each one in its own little bucket. But in real life, those things are being discussed simultaneously, all at the same time. And what helps is when people can come in and draw out the distinctions between the pros of this and the pros of this, rather than saying, this bucket, this bucket, this bucket. And I know that the competition itself sort of asks you to do it differently, but I guess my point is draw some distinctions between them. In other words, go ahead and weigh. As consultants, you are trying to help me weigh difficult decisions in this giant pool of information that really can't be separated as neatly as all these different nice little buckets. And then lastly, and this is kind of just a small point, there's a point on your slide that says you can't violate the law and be ethical. I know what you mean. And in this particular context, I'm sure that to a certain degree that's true, but I immediately thought of 5 different ways that that's not true, where you actually can violate the law and be more than ethical. So if that's an important part of your presentation, you might consider either revising it or saying a little bit more about what you mean there. I think I know what you mean. And in business, I understand that there is certainly an inclination to follow the law above all else. And yet it is certainly not true that you can't violate the law and still be ethical. And I think that's it.
Thank you. And my own comments really echo a lot of what the previous 3 have said. I think there's a sort of a paradox here about this competition. The role play means that we're senior leaders in this company, so we should know an awful lot about the subject matter. The fact of the matter is we are judges who come from different walks of life and might not know a lot about this subject matter. And so when you present to us, we have to learn a lot fast. And even your executive summary is not enough. So I found myself kind of swimming in the information flow that you presented to us. I have no doubt that it was accurate and that it was full of well thought out propositions, but there was so much of it, and it was coming at me so fast that I had a very hard time absorbing it. So as a constructive criticism, I think there needs to be some simplification of the presentation to make it a little bit more digestible to the audience, even if the audience is senior leaders of the company. And I think that was implied by what Mr. Truslow was saying. There's the slides had too much information on each one, and the speakers were speaking too fast. So I would slow down, and well, you won't be using slides for the 10-minute presentation tomorrow or the 90-second. So the busyness of the slides won't be an issue tomorrow. But if you ever do the 30-minute presentation again, I would make it easier on the audience. I know that the what you put on those slides was valuable information, but in the communication of that information to an audience, it's got to be simplified, or else it's not going to be effective, in my opinion. The ethical analysis was fascinating to me. You did a cost-benefit analysis, or appealed to the cost-benefit framework. You appealed to the duty-based framework. You mentioned fairness and the environmental importance of environmental thinking. And yet, what I heard was that the law is an ethical minimum, and that's really pretty much all we're recommending, that we incorporate law into our self-regulation. Now, maybe I missed your message, because I know you said, let's be leaders, let's be out front, let's make OpenSea a leader. but when I look at what the recommendation was, it seemed minimal rather than the sort of thing you'd expect from a leader, which would be pushing the envelope rather than doing the base minimum. So now it's possible that I just wasn't getting your message right, but that's what I was taking away. And if so, that I'm just wondering to myself, why not push the envelope a little further? Of course, that might make the January problem even worse, but that's my comment. And I think that's it. Do you have comments that you'd like to make about our comments or about anything else before we close?
Thank you for everything. We paid attention to it all. We listened. We'll really pay attention to those. Thank you so much.
I would just add a comment that two things. One about the slides. There are a couple of times where you had a slide with like 3 things on it, and then the next slide had the same 3 things but expanded. In doing a presentation, just put the 3 things, expand it as you talk, but don't do it as a slide, because it gets to be too busy. People watching stop listening and start reading. And what you want to do is you want your slides to grab them, but you want them to listen to you. And the other thing is just when framing, especially in a short presentation, for the leadership, for whoever your audience is, they're sitting there saying, what's in it for me? And so whatever the message you want to give, think about how you can frame it, that it becomes a message to them saying, this is what's in it for you. If you do this, this is the benefit to you. This is the benefit to you, OpenC. This is the benefit. If it's your clients, this is the benefit to the client or whatever. It may help you frame and think about how to frame the wording and still say exactly what you said, because a lot of it you did frame as what's in it for us as OpenC. So that was very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Any other
Awesome.
comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I think that this was, I'm speaking for many of my teammates right now, but this was a completely new space for a lot of us. So it was really interesting to kind of get to dive into more of like the technological frameworks that oftentimes just as business students, we don't get super into, specifically in like the digital assets of NFTs. So it was a pleasure getting to share that knowledge with you guys and to kind of gain your insights as well. So it was a pleasure presenting today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I certainly learned a lot.
Thank you for all your hard work. It was really good.
Yeah, thank you.
And it was clear how much work you put into it.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, then I think it's time for us to close. And
Ken, I had one thing for the team. Tom wanted me, Dr. White wanted me to ask you to email who will be presenting tomorrow. So if you haven't done that, please go ahead and do that. Thanks.
And I want to wish you well tomorrow for these excruciating 10-minute and 90-second competitions. Good luck. I've been through it. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Take care.
The judges will stay on.
I'll stop recording now, Ken.
Yes.
Okay. Stop recording.
Did we lose John?
I think we lost John.